Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Harrison. I'm the co-director of the Institute for Molecular Science and Engineering. And the first job I think I have is to apologise to you for the fact that we've had some technical difficulties, and so we're starting slightly late. So for those of you who have just joined, thank you for your patience. The purpose of the lecture this afternoon is to explore art and culture and heritage and where they meet science. And I just have a few very short announcements to make before we start. The meeting will be recorded, so bear that in mind. If you have any questions to ask during the talk, please type them into the Q&A section that you'll see at the bottom right of your screen, and they'll be addressed at the end of the talks. And with that said, I'll just say a very few words about the Institute before we move on to the talks. And the Institute for Molecular Science and Engineering is one of the global institutes at Imperial College London. So they're cross-college, inter-faculty organisations designed to promote and to enhance the science and technology that we do within college. The purpose of the Institute is to promote this particular kind of science, so it's unusual that it targets the type of science we do rather than a particular subject area, and it promotes convergent science. So that's the idea of linking molecular sciences, chemistry, physics, biology, through physical properties and material performance to engineering, which is where we're manufacturing materials and devices and we're concerned about their function for you typically in the built environment, and then how the functioning of those devices when they come to their end can lead to sustainable materials so that we can recycle everything we use. So at the moment, while the entirety of our energy system and our transport systems, and by the looks of it, our medical systems are going to need a huge overhaul in order to survive into the next century, IMS is attempting to select and work on major grand challenges that are facing us. In doing so, it's trying to vastly accelerate the current innovation process. We sit within a very vibrant university, as I hope most of you know, and so within that university we also have these other 5 global challenge institutes, so climate change, health, energy, security sciences and data sciences. So IMSI works closely with these other institutes where appropriate, where the subject matter is appropriate, and we try to promote convergent science throughout the college and through these institutes in particular. Having said that, I'm going to pass you over to Amparo Galindo to tell you a little bit more about how we do that.
So, thank you everyone for being here. So I'm Amparo Galindo, the other co-director of the Institute, and it's a pleasure to be here just to tell you briefly what we do. So we're here with an aim to accelerate innovation in the area of interdisciplinary research that brings together molecular science and molecular engineering. And so as an institute, we're here to add value to the research that we are all doing. It's about putting people together and facilitating research and facilitating successful research that is eventually funded and takes us all forward in delivering solutions for grand challenges. So the way briefly in which we do this, you have here kind of a picture organigram at the top, is that we engage with stakeholders internally and externally, initially from government, industry and academia, and we run internal workshops, seminar series, events such as the one we have today, seed funding events that bring us together and help us meet researchers that we might not otherwise become in contact with. And then we facilitate, we have the means, the people, the time, and the interest to put research project proposals together to support you and to make sure that we have successful funded projects in the end, as I was saying, to address these grand challenges. And if we can go to the next slide, Nick. Thank you. So in terms of focus for the research or for the work that we are doing at the moment in the Institute, we have organized our goals, let's say, under 3 grand challenges, which are sustainable technologies, industrial innovation, and improving health and well-being. And within those, we have research themes, and you have a list there. And one of those, as you can see, is the fourth one. We have science and engineering research for cultural heritage, which fits within the event we have today, partly motivated by the new network of excellence that the college has chosen or has agreed to support for this area. And this is very exciting for us in IMSI, and of course for the people in the excellence network. And so today we have two speakers, and then we'll have a panel discussion. So, very exciting and looking forward to that. We are lucky to have Sarah Healy-Dilks, first of all, who's a senior sculpture conservator in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and she will give a brief talk. And then we will have Anne Barrett, who is our own archivist and corporate research records manager in the college. Okay, so they will be giving two brief talks, introducing themselves and so on. And we will have a panel chaired by Professor Sean Harding, who is the chair of Imperial Artworks. And so really looking forward to that. I hope you are too. And again, thank you for joining us. And I pass over to Sarah.
Thanks for that. Thank you very much for inviting me and to the first in your series of seminars. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm here on the back of the V&A and my work at the V&A as a conservator. I've been involved in conservation for over 20 years since graduating at City and Guilds Art School in London, and prior to that I was involved in fine art and started a career in sport as well before that. So I'm happy to be in conservation now and have been for over 20 years. So, and I've been in the conservation studio, the sculpture studio at the Victoria and Albert Museum as a part-time member for the last 13 years, whilst running my own practice in Cambridge. So I'd like to set off with the first introducing a project for this seminar, which I think ticks all the boxes, both boxes of science and engineering. It is it's a very large architectural cast from the V&A's cast collection, and sits in two sections and a height of 20 meters, 15 meters respectively, and it comprises of over 500 cast plaster panels which are fabricated and fixed onto a central supporting structure, which is very often the case with gypsum, which doesn't have any sort of loading strength, so it's not a building material in that sense. So a little bit more about the object. The origins of the V&A copy is a product of a series of quite large industrial engineered events. So in 1861, Napoleon III went to Rome and commissioned two sets of plaster casts of the marble column in the Forum in Rome. And one of those sets he took back to Paris. One stayed in Rome and wanted to display it outside, but because of the sort of vulnerability of gypsum in an outdoor setting, he commissioned Leopold Audrey, an industrialist in Paris at the time, to make a copy into electroplates, which are copper plates. And you can see in this on the screen there one of the sections of that copper plate electrotype. And in 1863 the V&A asked if they could have their own copy, and so moulds were taken, so we now understand, from the electroplate, and were shipped over and to the V&A and installed in new galleries that were built specifically with the intention of being able to display very large architectural artworks. That's what you see here. You see the historic photo with the brick chimney. The interiors are 2 brick chimneys, and the plaster panels are beginning to be installed, fixed to the outside of the chimney. The 2 interiors are slightly different. You can see the sort of the base with the piers there on the left, and the second smaller section of the column that we've got rope access team going down from the top, and yes, so that gives you an idea of the sort of construction. The end phenomenal. It was actually installed and constructed by a team of Royal Engineers, which was what happened in that time for government buildings. So it was an ambitious building project at the time. So moving swiftly on. So we, a team of conservators, we were involved in having access to the cast collection during a period of 2017 to 2019, and we were given 6 months full scaffold access. So this was, as far as we know, was a first for the large cast, and certainly the first known conservation phase of work for the Cast of Trajan's column. So we had a window of 6 months, 10 levels of scaffold, and it was quite important to kind of work out what our priorities were going to be. I had a team of myself working part-time and 2 freelance conservators who joined us for that period, and we kind of set the priorities as to record as much and carry out a survey and gain as much material understanding of the cast as we could, both internally and externally, and to try and investigate materials because there was no prior records, and to undertake at the same time remedial conservation treatment. So that's what we set up, and the large scale of these casts really challenged, you know, what recording we were able to do in the department, and it's the first time we started to try and create digitized copies. We were using Photoshop to do that, and that's what you can see on this slide. We developed a legend to the right, describing materials we saw, and then also drawing out and mapping any deterioration mechanisms that we saw on the column, and then we also used it as a way of marking up where we had treated. So it's a sort of does as much as we can hope for, really. And just to, before we move on to the next slide, to just make note here of what we very quickly started to see was a lot of cracking, and the cracking was happening around the panel, the joints of each panel. Generally over both sections there was this sort of cracking. We could see both horizontal and it neatly delineates where your individual panels are, and that's backed up by numbers on each cast as well. So there's a sort of detail showing you the sort of horizontal and the vertical cracking, and at the same time, actually going back to the other one, is that there is a legend there where we describe as metal crypto, which we had a small handheld metal detector, and we were able to trace out sort of embedded square bar, iron bar in each of the panels, which is a fairly common method for plaster casts to need that embedded support and reinforcement. So that was occurring on all those panels, and where it was coming very close to the front surface, we were tending to get this sort of disruption to the front, and they also were occurring very much really close to the edge of each panel, so in those joint lines. So there's a combination possibly of the reason for the cracking happening there. And then the other deterioration pattern that was becoming more and more obvious was the sort of the variance in the soilings, you know, from heavy to very fine. We had inconsistencies in the polychromy, and we've got a picture here of spotting, which began to become much clearer as we cleaned the object. And we were assisted with some science analytical support from the V&A and also from a lab in Erfurt, but it was hard fought for, and yeah, it wasn't in place right at the beginning. So it was we were doing this, you know, kind of increasing our understanding sort of as we were going, and there was we got what support we could from science, and we were able to establish that these spotting that was occurring throughout was a copper residue. So we assume that it's possibly a residue from the molds that were taken from the electrotype back in Paris. That's where we stand on that interpretation at the moment. And then another aspect of the project was there was a whole a real interest in the new digitization of artworks with scanning and 3D modeling, and we were able to we were able to have a pilot study of photogrammetry and scanning of a section of the column to see how those processes would work for a section of the column, to see, you know, what the challenges were, possibly to see a comparison between the two techniques. So that's what we did there, and we've sort of gathered information about sort of how much data would be required and what sort of accuracy you could achieve. So that was carried out by George, who from the V&A, and Karina was very kindly came with, offered her time and equipment, came up to do that for us, alongside some very good consistent set of photographs from a freelance photographer who was commissioned to do it. Because the Trajan's columns was so large that I felt it was a very important thing to have at the end a very good consistent set of high resolution photographs, which Carlos has produced for us, which we'll grid and put on the database, and hopefully that will work for conservation and also public interest, because that we're very much aware that external, you know, people are very keen to see the whole narrative on the column, which needs to be made available, really. So imaging, and that's it. So well, because yeah, I always saw that our work was a phase of work, and we did prioritize, you know, gathering the information, doing very remedial treatments, trying to increase our understanding of the object. However, I always felt it was a sort of context of having a further phase, which would be this is a wish list to look for, to really pin down the corrosion and scope for treatment, and causes of cracking, relationship with the gallery environment, where there is a student from UCL who's doing a dust modelling for us, which would be really good. And yeah, towards the whole sustainable plan and management for the cast collection. And I was very impressed actually with the RopeAxis team, because it was a very what's the word, appropriate, seemed a very appropriate good access. So yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. So my name is Anne Barrett. I'm the College Archivist and Corporate Records Manager at Imperial. And I've had this role for quite some years now. So I've got quite a wide-ranging view of what there is and of the area. So what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about how I see we fit in the context of South Kensington, and something about some of the materials and items we have. So my premise is that the South Kensington Cultural Quarter, as we can move on, that's fine, that we, it is sometimes called, was founded on the basis of science and art, because the Science and Art Department, you can't really see it terribly well here, but over that image on the right hand side of the doorway, it's the Science and Art Department and the Science School. But getting ahead of myself here, it was really the 1851 Great Exhibition that started off the whole area. So we have Prince Albert to thank for that. And I've put in a plan, it's later than the 1851, to show the area and how it was, and how it hadn't quite developed as to how we see it now. But it's an ever-changing area. And indeed, the institutions are ever changing in what they do and how they work. So a couple of the schools, well, yeah, a couple of the schools of Imperial moved from Jermyn Street to what is now the Henry Cole wing of the V&A in the 1870s. And then with the other constituent colleges of Imperial, which is a huge development, which I won't go into now, they were called the Science Schools. And the Science Schools produced a journal entitled Science and Art. And because at that period, there was always the idea that science, art, technology met. And we talked about the manufacturing arts. That's one of Prince Albert's notions. And it was something that was carried through the 19th century. So the people at Imperial were also very interested in this type of thing. Sorry, it wasn't Imperial then, but were interested very much in this type of thing. So I'll just tell you some of the items here. So the image of Prince Albert is a copy of a Winterhalter portrait, very famous artist of the period. I've mentioned the map. That is something that is in the college archives. And then we've also got this volume of it's called Science and Art, and it was an odd journal that was produced, and we don't have the full set of it, but we have some of it. And it shows you the interiors of the building and some of the classrooms, and it expresses how it was for people there at the time. So that's just those sort of things. And we have a long literary legacy in student journals and training in writing up to today. We have a journal produced most years by students called Phoenix, in which they write poetry, essays, and we have the weekly Felix magazine, which just has it's like a newspaper really, and so that they have students can put in whatever they like and have a different editor every year. So it's quite an interesting and changing volume of material that we have there. So my job is basically to ensure the longevity of all this material and the legacy in reflecting the history of college and to continue to collect it further. So basically my job, I need to know what's happening now in order to make sure that we capture it. And this is much harder now in the digital age, but we do have tools to deal with that, which we are doing as best we can. But we're really in a very exciting place for any of this sort of thing. Particularly my interest is in art and history and science, so they all come together at college and in the archives. And actually art is inherent in the college archives, and the following slides I hope will show this. So this is the basis on which Imperial is founded. This is our foundation document, but I'm showing it really because it shows you the mixed media that we have to deal with in terms of conservation and preservation. So we have a parchment document with inks, and then we have cotton cords, and then we have a wax seal, and we also have it mounted. And probably the way it's mounted wasn't done by me or my conservator, so I'm not quite sure how good a thing it is in terms of longevity. And all these items require different types of care. So what I've tried to do is just show you a little bit of what we've got. So if we go back to the 19th century, we've got the chemistry of colour. We can go on to this, the chemistry of colour, which is Perkin purple, which kicked off the aniline dye industry, which meant that people could have the royal colour purple because they could afford to have it, because previously it had been very expensive to produce, so it was mainly royalty that wore it. And this was a very exciting innovation. That was by one of our alumni. And again, this image is of mixed media. So this was presented to the archives, and it is a piece of silk dyed from Perkin's original Movine. But then we have this piece of flimsy typing paper. We have the typing ink. We have some old sellotape marks, as you can see, and these are all stuck together and all requiring different types of conservation and preservation. So constantly there are these things we have to think about. But then we have holography, which I think is a really exciting discovery, which was known not to have a purpose actually when Denis Gabor invented it. He knew this, but when lasers came along, it really took off. But actually, it is now an everyday item because it's on a bank card, and you'll see this little silver glittery thing. That's a hologram, and it's a security device. Now, there was no way that Gabor would ever have thought that would happen when he invented it. So one of my real interests is how do we repurpose material items that have no purpose at the time or do not have the right technology to develop it or make it of value, and how do we find them? And these are some of the things that I'm looking into very much. And then we have a lot of other types of models, which I'll move on to showing you. So we have this very intricate papier-mâché model for teaching, because in the 19th century we didn't have the physical creatures. There was no way of preserving them, and except in as pickled, as it were. That's not a very technical term, sorry. But this type of Orzou papier-mâché model allowed you to see the intricacies of the venous system and understand it. And these actually do scare people because the leech is very big, and if you had one like this, you wouldn't have anything left in your system. And I've also got a very big snail, and there would certainly be no plants left if that was let loose in the garden. And then the other, on the other side, you see glass models. Now these are extremely fragile. They are absolutely beautiful, and they are made by father and son from the Bohemian country, which is now part of Poland. And they're so fragile, I have to keep them in the dark because they can just disintegrate just by looking at them. But they're really very good examples of teaching models, and yet there are some other types of flower models which are at Harvard, and they're completely different. So one of the things I'd really like to do is to have the materials department or the relevant department analyze the glass properly. We sort of started this some years ago, but we haven't done it because the recipe was secret, and I don't think the formula is being handed down. And then we move on to some mathematical models. So we've got 3D modeling before computer technology here with the wooden items, and with the plaster models, metal models, and behind them, and it's not very big, you can just see we have photographs of as well. So we have different types of photographs, and then again we have to work out how we manage all those. Now you'll see labels on these, and that is because it's very important to document what you have. So metadata, or cataloging, if you want to call it the more old-fashioned term, is a feature of all heritage materials to inform holdings, locate them, as well as bind them, and include the all-important provenance. Where does it come from? Who made it? Why have we got it? And that's one of the main roles that we have. We have to explain things. We have to know why we've got it, what its purpose is, and also how to look after it. So if we move on to the next slide, this is another example of mixed media. So we've got, this wasn't built as built. This is a model of how Imperial could have been once we started knocking everything down in the 1950s and early 60s. As you see, still the tower remains, but it could have been quite different. We could have a railway station where the library is, that type of thing. But interestingly, this is a lot of different media. So we've got cardboard for the models, metal for the trees, different paintwork, and perspex, and on a wooden base. And one of the things that I always like to think about when there are any models or anything to be made is that we have a huge range of technicians who are very important to us in terms of creating items at Material for our items at Imperial for our research and development. And if they can't make the models, then you can't do everything in computer generated images. It's actually very nice to have models, and their skills are amazing. And perspex is not an easy material to work with. So I have quite a few examples of that type of thing. And so I think we really do need to recognise the skills of technicians, and apprenticeships are very important as well, I think, in continuing on these skills, glass blowing and that sort of thing. So then we move on to a different sort of art, which is modern photography, used to make artistic images of scientific instruments. So these are just various items that were lit in a particular way to show things off, but in a more prosaic form. I've got some computer motherboards and that type of thing, which were illustrative of the basis of college computing. So that they're quite important to show how in development of that sort of technology. And I've had special boxes made for them of a material called Plasterzote, which is an inert protective foam, and had inserted in it a perspex top so that you don't have to handle the fragile motherboards, and they should be as protected as possible from dust, dirt, and other things that might make them deteriorate, because actually they also have strings and ribbon in them. They're not just metal and solder and the other things that make them work. So, I mean, conservation and preservation is a part of archival work all the time. We have to be thinking about it all the time. What do we do? How do we keep things? We have to keep things dust-free. We have to use acid-free inert materials. So inert polyester films to keep some documents in, some photographs in, and acid-free envelopes, folders and boxes. But then we get on to a completely different type of thing. So Charing Cross Medical School, the student union, we have some ores, so we have another complex system of materials. We have wood, we have varnish, we have paint, and how do we keep those? They're in the light. you know, they have to be on display. I mean, that's a good thing. And then by the side of it is a drawing of the Putney Boathouse, which is in chalks. So we again have to be concerned about how that is conserved. And it's interesting now because Imperial does have an intellectual and practical investment in art training. In the Blythe Centre, that features training in art and drawing and also in music. And if we move on to the next slide, the art of music is very strong at Imperial. On the right is a musical score by the composer George Dyson, who was the director of our neighbour, Royal College of Music. And he set Wordsworth An Invocation to Science for us in 1949. And I just thought, well, this is quite a nice thing to show, because again, it's an innovative art form. So we bring literature together with music and science. And also this is a music library as it was in the 1980s, showing vinyl records. And in the archives, we still have vinyl recordings. We also have audio tapes, videos, floppy disks, CDs, data sticks, and hard drives. So we run the whole gamut right up to digital. So on my last slide, I'm just going to say this is a very brief run through of the materials we hold in the college archives. It's hugely varied in terms of materials and the challenges of preserving such mixed media. And I think it's always important to use professional conservators, which I do for different things, although I have quite a very amateur background in book binding and conservation work. And I did actually at one time run a no sellotape proper book repair section in the library, but that was many years ago. And I'm also on various conservation committees, including British Standards Committee for conservation of library and archive materials. So I look very much on the archive material as art and setting it in the cultural context of science, technology and medicine. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to both Anne and Sarah there for their really fascinating talks, actually. And joining us now with various other people to have a discussion. We're hoping that you, the audience, will contribute to this by putting your questions in the Q&A, and I'll be able to see those as we go along. And you can ask our people there for what they, anything you'd like to ask. So just to start off with our discussion on art and cultural heritage meets science, I should just introduce myself. I'm Sian Harding, Professor of Cardiac Pharmacology at the college. I'm also on the Board of Trustees of the Chisenhale Art Space in East London. We have two committees at the moment. One is the history group, thinking about our cultural heritage and how we assess that or reassess that. And the artworks group is a parallel strand, which may take new people to celebrate from there, and generally increasing the cultural diversity of the artistic diversity of the college. I'm just going to introduce everybody, and Anne and Sarah, I think, have introduced themselves very well. We have Professor Pierluigi Dragotti, who's an Imperial College Professor of Signal Processing on a number of the IEE committees in terms of image processing, signal processing and computational imaging, part of the IVE. And we have Geraldine Cox, who's our artist in residence in physics, and she's in fact got a degree in fine arts, physics and fine arts, has been with us since 2011 doing various projects. So that's a very nice mix of people there. I haven't forgotten anybody. So I'm just going to start off with the basic function of search and what search is trying to do. So in terms of, we've heard of Anne was giving a wish list of what she might like to see in terms of new techniques. I'm wondering, what are the hot new techniques that the search is aiming to bring to the conservation area? I don't know if Pierre, you could talk about this.
Okay, you put me in a corner, right? So in the spotlight. Yeah, so maybe, okay, I'll say a few things about my background so that it's more clear, I don't know, the scope that I can cover in my answer. So as you mentioned, I do a lot of digital image processing. And in terms of art and heritage sector, I work a lot with the National Gallery, where they have this interest, obviously, in analyzing paintings. And so they use imaging techniques to have information about the painting, also what is underneath the painting. And they need to have someone who develops method that can interpret that data, and which is what we do. We help them to visualize data, to visualize hidden features underneath the painting, to work out material used in the painting, and so on and so forth. And one of the things we do, we use also artificial intelligence to help us to do that. So when the problem is a little bit, let's say, too complicated to model, maybe using more traditional mathematical or physical models, then we sort of resort to some automatic way to address these questions based on artificial intelligence, where we sort of throw data at the system, and the system produces the answers. And so that is probably one of the new frontiers of research in that area. Okay, so digitalization of artwork was mentioned before. And so that's another frontier where we can maybe create new way to digitize artworks, to create new way for the public to experience the artwork, but also to see maybe some artwork the way it was when it was conceived, because we know that something deteriorates, and it is sometimes difficult to restore it to the original version, or there might have been some composition on top, for example, of a painting, which we cannot really remove. And so through this form, let's say, of processing, we can, I think, either help curators and restorators, but also to help the general public to have a completely different experience with art.
Thank you. It's very interesting about the artificial intelligence. That's getting everywhere these days. And maybe Anne and Sarah, you could give a wish list in terms of what you're seeing on the horizon, what search could bring for you.
Well, Sarah, you go first.
Well, I might have quite a long list. I might need to put in an email to you. But certainly what the challenge was for our team in conservation with the large architectural cast was the collection of that data, you know, really challenged our processes as they are. So you know, if we had more technology like the pilot 3D modelling that colleagues did, the data was pretty large and I think there is a hope to put that onto the website, but it's that sort of, it's not just sort of our use of it, but it's also the sort of where it's all going to be stored and how accessible that information is going to be. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's sort of, it's the whole system really, isn't it? From the front, you know, from what we're doing with the object to where it gets stored and how it's going to be accessible really. That was what the conclusion we're always coming to with new technologies.
Well, I wonder if search can be one of the sort of areas which would be great if we could collaborate a lot more on that, and we could keep our results visible, because it would help a lot of other people work through things. I mean, it is a shame Mary's not here because she worked on the Mary Rose, and that's a whole new range of techniques. And you know, as I said, I would hope that having developed search, once we're back on campus, someone will be able to use some of the glass samples and discover what we've got in, what it's made of, and perhaps help stabilize them a bit more, and that sort of thing, really. But I think it's a collaborative thing, and the drawing together it's because it's very exciting what we've got and what we try to bring out. I mean, I'm on Sian's artwork group, and we have ideas about how we can do things, but there are different levels of what is possible, and this is a different, more scientific remit, I think, that we could tap into different things, and that because we're now showing people things that they didn't know we had, because I haven't had anywhere to show them before, I think that'll open up a huge range of possibilities.
Mm. Yes, yes. If you're showcasing them as part of this search, that could be very good. I mean, as you were talking about 3D reconstructions, we have actually a question in the chat about the Trajans column. Do you regularly use the 3D digitizations by laser scanning or photogrammetry to see the evolution of the materials after the restoration? Do you look at that? And it continues, so I'll just read all of it and you can choose what to answer. And did you try pixel manipulation on those beautiful photographs, such as using the D-Stretch software to see evolutions, or even see whether you can evidentiate the different materials that you saw during the restoration with this kind of pixel manipulation?
I presume that's directed.
Yes. Trajan's column, I think it's for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, it's a very dense lot of information there, and I'd be happy to, kind of take that up with whoever the question comes from. But just the pilot study we did was probably by your standards quite basic. My knowledge is quite basic, and I think it was about the opportunity to sort of see how the scanning might work, how the photogrammetry might work. So probably on a fairly, in terms of digitization technology, it was probably fairly basic. But the colleagues who were doing it would, I'm sure, be happy to sort of take up some of your questions. So really, no, we're not regularly using 3D modeling and scanners at the V&A, certainly. But
let's hope Aurelia is somebody who doesn't know how to do this, and we'll get in touch with you afterwards. So
is that from?
So let's hope we wish that might be the case. Yes. And so in terms of the sort of science of restoration, we've had to think in the artworks and the history group about our cultural heritage in a different way. Is the attitude to restoration changing? Are there kind of cultural things seeping through there as well?
Well, I think they're always keeping up to date with everything. As I say, I'm on various committees, including British Standards, for conservation library materials, so library documentation, and I think people are always constantly looking into things, because actually conservators are very scientific. I mean, a lot of their work is based in science, so they do need to know quite a lot. And of course, with new technologies, even new ways of gluing something together, as it were, that's another question of how you keep it going, that it doesn't fall apart or whatever, and so there's an awful lot to be looked at, and I do think that people do a lot of research. As Pier Luigi said, of course, at the National Gallery they're doing an awful lot of this work, and I'm sure Mary could have answered this better than me, but with the work she's doing on the Mary Rose, and she's also done something on down planes, World War II planes, I think. And that's another type of, so it's metal to wood and that sort of thing. So I do think people do look at it quite in depth.
I'm just wondering if how you restore things, whether you go for complete scientific accuracy and bring it back to its absolutely pristine state, or whether you're looking at something that keeps part of what it's experienced during its lifetime as well. Are there thoughts about how far you should go with restoring a piece?
Yes, very much so. I mean, there's the difference between restoration and conservation, and restoration would be taking something right back to how it was, but conservation is keeping it going in a way, but keeping it well and healthy and viable. And there's many people, which probably Sarah, I hope you'd agree that Pier Luigi, that if you restore something, you're actually damaging it more than if it's just naturally deteriorating.
That's very profound. I am an engineer, right? So I leave this to the restorator and the curators, right? So, I mean, the way I see it is that, as you said, the curators are, have an incredible knowledge. And in some sense, what we do from the technological side is to provide them as much information as we can about, for example, a painting. And again, going back to the example of painting, trying to help them to see, for example, where there are already retouches, whether there is something underneath, maybe information about the material so that they can, I don't know, understand better the technique used at the time, so that whatever action they do is as informed as possible. Now, how they should do the restoration, that's really something beyond my knowledge.
May I just interject at this point?
And provide the answers.
I'm just wondering, it would be so interesting to ask artists what they think in general about how they'd like their own artworks to be preserved. It might give us an insight. I mean, I think if you ask me, I'd like my paintings to be returned to the original colour, if that was possible, so they could look like the way I'd intended them to be made.
And there's a question in the chat sort of related, whether there's issues within conservation you have to think about when you're creating new pieces. So, are you thinking about the longevity of your piece as you create it?
Well, there's a whole bunch of rules that I always follow that I learnt at the same art school that Sarah was at, actually. And so I'm very careful with the oils. I do a lot of painting, the oils that I buy and the surfaces that I create, and I avoid doing certain things I was taught not to do. So I'm very careful that they and I store them carefully as well. I think it's one of the things that I'm probably weak on, is really understanding what to do with digital assets that I create. Yeah, I really haven't got the faintest idea about how I should be really looking after those and where I should be putting them. And actually the records of my own artworks as well. I have them photographed. A lot of them are photographed, but what should I do with all of those files?
Well, there are digital preservation systems, and we do have one in the archive. So,
well, Anne and I, you and I should talk. Then the other aspect of my work is I produce a lot of workshops that I think of as artworks, and I don't document them well enough. So, yeah.
Well, I think there's very simple ways of documenting things for people, because one of the problems is that documentation is a distraction from what people are really doing, and so they don't do it. And so it's our sort of job as archivists, curators, whatever, I think, to make it as simple as possible. So I quite often just create a form and say, just put this in here. You don't have to think about what to put, you just put down what you want to put. And if you just want to do free text, well, you do it, but at least then you've got a record of it. And that's, I like to make it simple for people. So I'll send you some forms if you like.
Well, it's actually something I'm working on, and I do really value it. And actually, I probably spend as much time writing about my work as making it, and trying to find resonant ways to describe it. So I'm working on it.
I think that's very valuable, actually, because I get inquiries about we used to have quite a lot of different art events at college, and there was a particular one which no one had properly documented, including the artists themselves. Or their studio, and so I don't think we might have had one very small mention of it in a magazine, but we haven't got what they want from it. So I think it's actually very important to do it for your own peace of mind as much as anything else.
Well, actually, it's satisfying because I think then you can take a more objective view on what you've made, and actually it can be very helpful and help you decide what to do next. So, yeah, it is a good part. It is a good discipline for sure, Anne. Absolutely.
Can I just say, Geraldine, about artworks? I know at the Tate Tate, they do series, you know, when they acquire artwork, they do artist interviews, and they're kind of designed to capture all those sort of questions about what the artist's intention is and what they would do if there's, you know, kind of deterioration happening. So they preempt it in some ways, so you know, the artist is actively involved. And you know, with some of the objects at the V&A, the contemporary ones, you know, where we can communicate to the owners, the stakeholders, I think that's a great way to go, actually.
Oh yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, it's also interesting to wonder how much your communication with them influences the way they work in the future as well.
Yeah, about the choice of materials, and and there's also the sort of display environment as well, about you know, choice of the artist as well, how they, anyway, yeah, no, it's there, and there is, you can see it on their website.
Okay, I'll have a dip in. That's really interesting, because I also, it's a really interesting point you make about display as well, because being a painter, you know, I was saying to someone the other day, it's so strange that I don't specify exactly what spectrum of light it should be even seen under.
Yeah.
You know, we just let these things go out into the world and think maybe a frame will do it or no frame will do it. But it's very interesting.
Can I just ask, I have one question for Anne about your collection. Is that, I might have missed it, but is it a sort of functioning collection that students use? Is it still in use?
No, they don't actually use it. There is a course where they can come and look at them, right. But I've always been very short on display space, which I would like to do. One of the things is my lovely Orzoo models are in a case, and they were just outside lecture theatres, which was great, so people could see them, but that's now replaced by recycling bins, so that's not quite as exciting in my view. So they're back in my corridor. But one of the things that Sian has been interested in on the Artworks group is if we could have a display space, but we think this is, you know, a more dedicated one, but we think this is probably unlikely, particularly at the moment. But it's certainly something that I would be keen to look into as well, yeah. But I mean, I would have visitors, well, not at the moment, obviously, but I'm quite happy to show people things if we make arrangements for it. So say you had people at the V&A, and we could do something officially.
I was particularly interested in those working models, the plaster mathematical models, actually. Have you got a number? I mean, what sort of number? I haven't got a huge number of them, but they're just they are actually on display. They're just in a different part of college.
And on that point, you know, I mean, I've seen models like that dotted around the physics department, hidden away in cupboards, and they're very beautiful things. And I've seen similar things in the Science Museum.
Well, we loaned one of ours to the Science Museum, so that might be where you saw it. But yes, it is one of the big difficulties, because there is, quite rightly, so much autonomy in departments, and there are people who really care about the stuff that they've got in terms of the. It's fantastic craftsmanship in wood, brass, and all sorts of different materials. Yeah. And it's great if they can be there, but the worry always is that the people who care about them leave, and then they just get put in a skip. Yeah. And I'm afraid this does happen. So I'm constantly, I mean, when there's a refurbishment with the States, I go around and we look at any item that might be needed care, retention or transfer to the archives if it's not going to be reused or put back. So we try and do that sort of thing whenever there's any refurbishment or anything of a building or department happening. So we have processes, but the processes can only go so far.
And I think you and I met when I was looking at the sculpture above the doorway to physics, which is a remarkable sculpture by Roger Skeeping.
Yeah,
exactly.
We went up to look out of that meteorological tower that we weren't supposed to be in.
Yes.
As well.
Yes, and I wonder how does your role extend to the maintenance and the care of things like the Skeeping sculpture?
Oh well, yes, very much. I mean, I look after the artwork. Yes, so I do. I mean, the sculpture's fine because it's weathered and it's quite happy.
Yeah, it's black slate, Irish slate,
Yeah.
I think I recall.
Yeah. So it's best left as it is.
How do you, I should ask, just throw this open. How do you like, how is it working with scientists? I asked with some trepidation for the artists here.
You're asking me. Well, I trained as a scientist originally, so I'm probably quite well into that camp, actually. I think when I first started, after leaving art school and coming to Imperial, I had to get used to how blunt they are. But now I really enjoy that. I really enjoy that direct honesty. I mean, artists are the same, but it's definitely the case with scientists, particularly physicists, maybe. So I really enjoy it, and I've learned a lot that I've incorporated in my artwork. There are aspects of the way science is done that I've brought into my art. So, for example, finding good questions, having a clear question in mind when you make an artwork, which is always at the heart of research-based science, and also just a preparedness to work over the long term, and to be really curiosity-driven, and also to embrace constraints. I've really enjoyed that, to create a constrained problem to solve. Sometimes art suffers from having no constraints, and I really love constraints. I think that's when really interesting things come out. So I've really enjoyed working with scientists and the scientific process.
We could turn that question round, Sian, and say what does scientists think of working with curators and artists?
The science art sort of congruency. I've always thought we shared something. Curiosity, yes, and a kind of mysteriousness to the public. My father, who was a photographer, and he specialised in art history, but in his spare time he used to do things for fun, and he would go to the rubbish dump and take photos of the wall where they threw the paint. When they were trying to throw away the paint pots, they threw the used paint there. And so he'd come every now and again and take pictures of the wall, which of course changed continuously. And people would come up to him and ask him, "What are you doing?" And he would explain, and then he got bored of explaining after a while. Then he would just say to them, "Oh, I'm an artist, you know." And they would go, "Oh, right, okay, yeah, sure." And I always thought it would work just as well as if he'd said, "I'm a scientist." If you'd said, "Oh, I'm doing this because I'm a scientist," people would think there's some mysterious reason for doing this. And so one of the best things about, I would say, about science, but maybe about art too, is you having an idea and then getting somebody to give you a large amount of money for this idea, and you're pretty sure they don't understand what it's all about. So anyway, that's my take on the science art thing. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about what they think.
I don't know. I come from the other end of the spectrum. My entire work is about making art and science totally accessible to as many people as possible. I'm really keen to demystify it and use very few technical words and open up these joyful and beautiful and imaginative subjects to everybody. That's really, and really.
The sort of artist is the job of the artist is to deepen the mystery, then the other way around, really.
Oh no, well, nature is already a mystery, an incredibly beautiful mystery, and offers us some incredible landscapes that I think there's this tremendous opportunity to share with a much wider audience, and that's really my philosophy, to help everybody share in and celebrate some of the things that we know. Really, you could say I operate probably in the zone of probably a 10-year-old child in the way we learn at school, which is, they learn something new, they celebrate it, they talk about it in any way they can. They might dance, they might draw, they might paint, they might make a graph. That's where I'd like us to head with art and science, really, as a partnership.
Well, that's great, because one of the questions in the chat was how can we make all our work more accessible to children? So I think yes, you've got that brilliantly. I don't know how, Sarah, how you engage young people in your work.
I think it's very noticeable that if anyone is working in the gallery, this is way before the pandemic, it was very, within seconds, there was a crowd around you. So people are very interested in seeing any activity and seeing any sort of, yes, another way to sort of see what's going on in a gallery rather than the sort of static objects. I think there is a very obvious engagement that way, and I think in terms of Pierre's work, sort of imaging, kind of what's not visible to the eye is a very engaging sort of way as well, because when things are on display, it's there, the whole picture's not there for you, is there? You often get the backs hidden and the structures hidden from real understanding. So I mean, I do have a question because I think it's a very I would say that making the material and the object much more visible on all levels actually gives such a sort of really increases the potential for people to engage with it and enjoy it. But I was going to ask Pierre if he had any way of making the sort of armatures in plaster casts visible, apart from bringing in X-ray machines.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, we use
there are other techniques.
There are other techniques which are a little bit more sophisticated. One is called fluorescence X-ray, which is similar to X-ray, but gives you more information at different depths and also about the chemical elements in the painting. And then we also use hyperspectral. These are the two techniques used very often. And
would they work at a, sorry?
Yes. No, so when you combine all these together, you might be able to not only visualize things which are underneath the painting, but also start working out the material used. And so, for example, if there is another painting underneath the one that you're seeing, you might start being able to imagine, okay, what was the color used in some bits of the painting. So in some sense, you could create an artificial painting of what is underneath, if you see.
Yes, but would that go to a certain depth, or are we talking about sort of really a 2D?
No, it's 3D. It's 3D. So you go all the way in underneath the painting. So you can see, for example, the sketches. For example, with hyperspectral. So maybe it depends on the painters, right? But some painters would, let's say, sketch, so draw in some sense the first sketches of the painting and then paint on top of that. And you can see that normally with infrared. But then again, you can have this process of the artists, right, where they maybe start painting and then they have these regrets, so they paint on top because I don't know, they've changed their mind. So you might be able to see this. Now, being able to produce a precise stratification of this 3D object is a hard problem, okay, which we haven't solved completely, okay. It's a very complicated problem. As I said, sometimes it's so complicated we throw the data to a machine and hope that they produce the result for us. But but that's definitely something we can achieve. We work on that, and I think one of the elements is that can create a sort of new way to present, for example, an artwork, which could be very engaging, especially maybe for younger people. And in light of that, I wanted to also mention another thing. So former students of mine, as a company, created for digitalization of artworks. And one of the things they do, they create these 3D models of paintings with photogrammetry. To use the photogrammetry means that they take many pictures with different light directions, so that by looking at the shadows, you work out the 3D. And the painting is a 3D object, because when you do brush strokes. You know, there are bits where you do more, and so it's and then there are cracks, etc. And so then you can show this painting, for example, on a tablet, where you can feel all, you know, the light effects, and you can move it and have a 3D experience. And now what is interesting is that they showed this to students in high school with the psychologists helping them, and compared it to how the students would react to the same painting if they were seeing only a digital image. And there is an echo. Anyway, it turns out that the students can memorize much better this painting shown in this much more complicated, sophisticated way. They did some memory tests with psychologists. So clearly the new technology is in some ways, you know, engaging in some ways these high school students. And I think, yes, new technology can definitely, I think, have a huge impact. It's already happening, okay, but they can have a huge impact in the way we can present art and, you know, make it more accessible and also more appealing.
I think that's very true, and then you've seen some of these ones where, like at the Royal Academy, they had a VR sort of presentation of a painting that you could walk into. That was fantastic. So yes, it's not only allowing us to keep more art, but to show art in different ways. And when we can't travel now to see the art, it is just amazing. I've enjoyed the tours of the galleries abroad as well on the virtual tours. Anyway, it's time to wrap up now, I'm afraid. I just wanted to thank all of you for this very, very interesting, very stimulating discussion. It's been great fun to have all of you there. Just to wrap up, Aurelia turns out to be an archaeologist, and she says they're using the technologies, and she's hoping the museums and restaurateurs will start to use them a lot too. So hopefully we might be able to hook you up afterwards. So thank you again to all the panelists. Thank you for your talk. I want to thank also Dr. Anne-Rose Taylor, who's the leader of the Search Network, the Holiday team, and Leah particularly I want to thank for rescuing us technologically when we were had this terrible glitch at the beginning. So thank you for all hanging in there and staying with us. And I'll just say goodbye. Thank you.